She threw the uniform out the front gate at 8:14 on a Wednesday morning, and the woman who had worn it for 11 years stood on the pavement and watched it land in the dust without bending to pick it up. The uniform was a pale blue cotton house dress with white buttons down the front. The kind you cannot buy in any market because employers had them made specially, so there would be no confusion walking down the road about what kind of person you were looking at. It had been washed so many times the blue had gone the color of a morning sky in Harmattan. Thin, clean, a little tired. It lay in the dust at the edge of the compound wall of number 14 Bourdillon Road, Ikoyi, Lagos. And the woman who had ironed it every Sunday evening for 11 years left it there. She picked up the small bag she had already packed, she had known since the night before, and she walked to the bus stop at the end of the road without looking back. What Mrs. Chidinma Obiora Nwosu did not know, as she turned away from the gate and went back inside to her marble hallway, was that the woman she had just fired had a file in her bag that could not be ironed away, and what the file contained had been waiting 11 years for exactly this kind of morning. Her name was Adaize Nwosu. She was 44 years old, 5 feet 2, and had the hands of someone who had been cleaning other people's houses since she was 19. Not rough, not scarred, but precise in the way that hands become when they have spent 25 years knowing the difference between a surface that looked clean and a surface that was clean. She had a gap between her two front teeth that appeared only when she smiled fully, which she did not do often in the house on Bourdillon Road, but which her daughter Ifeoma said made her look like someone keeping a good secret. Ifeoma was 22. She was in her final year at the University of Lagos, studying law, paying for it with the money Adaize sent home every month from the salary that was now gone. The combination of those two facts, daughter, law, final year, was not the part of the story Adaize told people first. It was the part she kept folded in the back of herself, the way she kept the important documents, pressed flat, in a part of the bag that did not open accidentally. She had come to Lagos from Enugu in 1999, when she was 23, following a distant cousin who knew a woman who placed domestic staff. She had worked in 4 houses before number 14 Bourdillon Road. She had left each of the previous 4 on her own terms, giving a month's notice, tidying the linen cupboard before she left, because she believed that how you left a place was a record of who you were, and records did not expire. At number 14 she had arrived in 2012, when Mrs. Obiora Nwosu's previous housegirl had gone back to the village to have a baby. And she had stayed because the work was steady, and the pay arrived on the 28th of every month, without argument, which was a rarer quality in an employer than most employers understood. She had also stayed because of the library. Mrs. Obiora Nwosu had inherited the library from her late father-in-law, a professor of constitutional law at the University of Lagos, who had died in 2009. It occupied the entire east wall of the sitting room, floor to ceiling, mahogany shelves, approximately 340 volumes, not including the periodicals. Nobody in the house used it. Mr. Obiora Nwosu traveled for work 9 months of the year and read only on his phone. The 2 children were in a boarding school in Abuja. Mrs. Obiora Nwosu read novels on a tablet and had once told a friend on the phone, in Adaize's hearing, that the library was more a feature of the room than a thing she had any use for. Adaize dusted it every Tuesday and Thursday. She had begun reading from it in her 2nd year at the house, starting from the left side of the bottom shelf, which was where the professor had placed his introductory texts, first-year materials, the kind designed to bring a person in from outside the subject. She read in the kitchen after the family slept, 2 hours at a stretch, the book flat on the table beside the last cup of tea she made herself before bed. She returned each book to its exact position on the shelf and never turned down a page corner. because the professor's handwriting was still in the margins of some of them, and she understood she was reading someone's thinking, not just their books. She had been doing this for 9 years. The thing that was in her bag was not a book. It was a certificate of completion from a distance learning program run through a college in Ibadan, a paralegal certification program, 18 months, completed in February of this year, 6 weeks before the Wednesday morning, with the uniform in the dust. She had passed the assessment examinations with a score of 89 out of 100. The program coordinator, a woman named Mrs. Ifunanya Okeke, had written in her final evaluation, clear legal reasoning, exceptional written analysis, self-directed in a way that is unusual for non-residential students. The evaluation was in the file beside the certificate. She had not told Mrs. Obiora Nwosu about the certificate. She had not told anyone in the house. She had studied at the kitchen table after the family slept, the same table where she read the library books, with the same cup of tea, for 18 months. She had submitted her assignments through an internet cafe on Awolowo Road, paying 200 per session. On the days, she had her 2 hours off in the afternoon. The reason she had been fired was not the certification. Mrs. Obiora Nwosu did not know about it. The reason she had been fired was a ceramic vase, a blue and white chinoiserie vase that had stood on the hallway console table for 6 of Adaeze's 11 years and that had been knocked to the floor on Tuesday evening by Mrs. Obiora Nwosu's younger cousin, who had visited for a long weekend and who had a way of moving through spaces as though he had already decided they were his. The vase had broken. Mrs. Obiora Nwosu had come to the hallway and looked at the pieces and then looked at Adaeze, and Adaeze had said, "Ma, it was not." "Don't talk," Mrs. Obiora Nwosu said. She looked at the pieces on the floor for another moment. Then she said, "Tomorrow, pack your things." The cousin was on the sofa in the sitting room. He did not come to the hallway. Adaeze had swept up the pieces and gone to her room and packed her bag and ironed the uniform one last time and laid it on the chair, because she was the kind of person who left things in order. At the bus stop on Bourdion Road, she sat on the low concrete lip of the bus shelter and set her bag between her feet and closed her eyes for 12 seconds. This was something she did when she needed to feel the exact shape of where she was before deciding where she was going next. She had done it in each of the previous 4 houses. On the day she left, her mother had told her once that the worst thing about leaving a place is that you take your whole body with you, and your body remembers everything. You have to give it a moment to catch up to where you are now. She opened her eyes. The morning was already hot. The Ikoyi sky had gone white above the trees the way it goes in November, when the harmattan is still making up its mind. And the air tasted of fine dust and vehicle exhaust, and the faint sweetness of the frangipanis that lined the compound walls of the houses along Bourdion Road. A security man 3 gates down was hosing down a driveway. A gateman across the road was eating from a black plastic bag, leaning against his booth, watching nothing in particular. The bus stop had no shade beyond a corrugated iron sheet nailed to 2 poles, and the sun was already coming in from the side. Adaeze moved 2 steps to put the sheet between herself and it. She had 11,200 in her account. Ifeoma's school fees were due in 6 weeks, 47,500, the last installment of her final year. She had been setting aside 800 every month from her salary for the past 7 months and had 56,000 in a separate savings account she thought of as Ifeoma's account, which meant the fees were covered. Which meant she had 6 weeks in which to find a salary before the mathematics of her situation became a different kind of problem. 6 weeks was not generous. It was enough. She took her phone from the bag and called Ifeoma. Ifeoma answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the background sound of the Unilag library, keyboards, a chair pushed back, the muffled acoustics of a space where people are trying to be quiet and mostly succeeding. "Mama, I've left the house," Adeze said. A pause. "When?" "This morning." Another pause. "Longer." The kind where you are deciding whether to ask what happened, or whether to let the person who is standing at a bus stop tell you what she needs to tell you, rather than what you want to know. Ifeoma was 22 and had been raised by a woman with precise instincts about what a conversation needed, and the instincts had transferred. "Where are you going?" Ifeoma said. "I am going to Mrs. Obiageli's office," Adeze said. "I am going to ask her to look at my file." Ifeoma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I will come to Lagos this weekend." It was not a question. "Study," Adeze said. "Finals are in 8 weeks. Mama, study," she said again. Not harshly, just finally. She ended the call and flagged down a passing bus. The conductor leaned out the door. She told him Broad Street. He told her 200. She handed it through the window and found a seat near the back, and the bag went between her feet again, and she kept one hand on it for the 40-minute ride across Lagos Island, not because she was afraid of losing it, but because it was the thing that mattered right now, and she had developed the habit, over 11 years, of keeping both hands near the things that mattered. If you can feel where this is going, subscribe now. Because what Adeze Nwosu was carrying in that file, and what Mrs. Obiageli already knew about her, had nothing to do with a broken vase. Mrs. Ngozi Obiageli ran a small legal support agency from a rented office on the second floor of a building on Broad Street, Lagos Island. 2 rooms, a waiting area with 4 chairs, a water dispenser that needed refilling every Tuesday, and a staff of 3, herself, a typist named Gloria, and a clerk named Emeka, who was also her nephew, and who she would not have hired except that he arrived early, every day without being asked, and did not take long lunches. The agency placed paralegals and legal support staff with law firms, NGOs, and the judiciary. She had been doing this for 14 years. When Adeze arrived, Gloria was at the reception desk sorting through a batch of documents. She looked up and then checked something on her notepad. "Mrs. Obiageli is with a client," Gloria said. She said 15 minutes. Adeze sat in the waiting area. The 4 chairs were upholstered in green fabric that had faded unevenly, darker on the armrests. The water dispenser hummed. A framed print on the wall said "Justice delayed is justice denied," and had been hung 3 or 4 degrees off level, in a way that suggested someone had meant to straighten it and kept not getting to it. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took the file from her bag and held it in her lap. She waited 22 minutes, not 15. When Gloria finally said, "She will see you now," Adeze stood, smoothed her dress once with the flat of her hand, and walked through. She and Adeze had met 3 years earlier at the Internet Cafe on Awolowo Road, where Mrs. Obiageli had gone to print a document and had found Adeze at the station beside her, typing up an assignment on evidence law with the careful, deliberate speed of someone who was not a fast typist, but was a very accurate one. Mrs. Obiageli had looked at the screen, not intrusively, just the way people look at the screens beside them in internet cafes. And then she had looked at the person typing, and then back at the screen, and she had said, quietly, "Are you in school?" "Distance learning," Adeze said. "Paralegal program." Mrs. Obiageli had handed her a card. "When you finish," she said, "come and see me." That card had been in the inside pocket of the same bag for 3 years. It had made it through 4 washings of the bag, because Adeze had a habit of removing the things from the inside pocket before washing, pressing them flat, and returning them to exactly the same place. She arrived at Broad Street at 10:47 a.m. Gloria showed her in without making her wait, because Mrs. Obiageli had left instructions the previous week, after Adaize had called to say the certification was complete, that she was to be shown in immediately whenever she arrived. Mrs. Obiageli read the file in 7 minutes. She turned the pages with the steady attention of someone reading a contract rather than a rersum, looking for the clause, not the introduction. When she closed the folder, she set it on the desk between them and put her hands flat on top of it and looked at Adaize over her reading glasses. "Your score was 89, she said. "Yes, the evaluation says exceptional written analysis." "Yes. How long were you in that house?" 11 years. Mrs. Obiageli was quiet for a moment. "Then," she said, "the Lagos High Court has been looking for a document management officer for the Judiciary Support Division since March. It is not a legal position, it is administrative. But it is inside the building, and the salary is regular, and it is the kind of position from which things are possible." She paused. "I have been holding it, waiting for you to finish." Adaize looked at her. She did not say anything for a moment. "You have been holding a job," she said. "I have been recommending a person," Mrs. Obiageli said. "There is a difference. The job is still a job. You will have to interview." "But yes." She took off the reading glasses. "I have been waiting." The interview was on a Thursday, 11 days after the Wednesday, with the uniform in the dust. Adaize wore a navy blue dress she had bought on Lagos Island for 4,500, not the cheapest she had seen, but the one with the correct shoulders, and carried the file in a new transparent document wallet she had bought at the stationery shop on Balagoon Market for 350. Her hair was in 2 flat plaits that sat close to her head, the way she wore it on Sundays. The interview panel was 3 people. She did not know any of their names beforehand. She answered their questions with the economy of someone who had been thinking about the law for 9 years from the bottom shelf of a dead professor's library, and knew, therefore, that the law was not impressed by volume, only by precision. When they asked about her organizational skills, she described the document filing system she had built, without being asked, for Mrs. Obiageli's agency during a 2-week stint helping with a backlog. A cross-referenced index organized by matter type, date, and client code that had reduced retrieval time from 11 minutes to under 3. When they asked about her background, she told them the truth in the order that was relevant. Paralegal certification, 18 months, score 89, prior work in household management for 11 years at a senior level. She did not apologize for any of it. The panel thanked her and said they would be in touch. Mrs. Obiageli called her on a Monday morning 16 days later. The Lagos High Court had offered the position. The start date was the 1st of the following month. The monthly salary was 187,000, which was 4 times what Adaize had been earning on Bourdillon Road, and which she received on the 28th of the month, which was a coincidence she noted and did not mention to anyone. She started on the 1st of the month. She learned the document management system in 4 days. By the end of the 2nd week, she had identified 3 classification errors in the existing filing index that had caused 2 sets of case documents to be misfiled under the wrong matter numbers, and she had written a 1-page memo to her supervisor noting the errors, their likely cause, and a proposed correction. Her supervisor, a man named Mr. Adeleke, who had been in the division for 9 years and who had the manner of someone who had long ago stopped expecting to be surprised, read the memo twice and forwarded it to the head of the division with a single line attached. This came from the new officer. She had been in the building for 6 weeks. The head of the division, a retired magistrate named Mrs. Constance Okafor, who ran the Judiciary Support Office from a corner room on the 4th floor with 3 potted plants and a window that looked out over the Lagos Lagoon, called Adadi into her office on a Thursday morning and asked her to describe, in her own words, how she had built the cross-referenced index she had described in the interview. They talked for 40 minutes. When Adize left Mrs. Okafor called Mrs. Obiageli and said, "Where has this woman been?" "In someone's kitchen in Ikoyi," Mrs. Obiageli said, "reading law books at night." There was a pause on Mrs. Okafor's end of the line. "I want to put her in the courtroom support rotation," Mrs. Okafor said. "Then put her," Mrs. Obiageli said. Mrs. Chidinma Obiora Nwosu's property dispute had been running for 14 months. It concerned a plot of land in Lekki Phase 2 that her late father had purchased in 1987, for which the title deed had gone missing during a house move in 2018, and which a neighboring family was now claiming on the basis of a competing deed. The case had moved slowly, as land cases in Lagos tend to move, through adjournments and missing documents and the scheduling difficulties of a court system that was carrying more matters than its calendar had room for. It came before the Lagos High Court on a Tuesday morning in November, assigned to courtroom 7 on the 3rd floor. Mrs. Obiora Nwosu arrived with her lawyer, a man named Barrister Segun Adeyemi Bright, at 9:20 a.m., and took her seat in the section behind the bar. She was wearing a cream Ankara suit she had commissioned for a wedding 2 months ago, and which had cost 38,000. Her hair was done. She had a leather portfolio on her lap that contained copies of every document her lawyer had advised her to keep. The courtroom had 12 people in it when she arrived, and the number grew to 23 by the time the clerk called the session to order at 9:47 a.m. The document management officer came in 2 minutes before the session opened, carrying a file box and a clipboard, and took her seat at the support desk to the right of the judge's bench. She set the file box down and opened the clipboard and looked at the cause list. Mrs. Obiora Nwosu did not see her come in. The judge arrived at 9:49. The clerk called all rise. Everyone stood. They sat. Barrister Adeyemi Bright leaned over to Mrs. Obiora Nwosu and said something about the first submission. She nodded without taking her eyes from the judge. The judge was reviewing the opening pages of the file. The courtroom support officer was passing documents from the file box to the clerk. The clerk was passing them to the bench. It was on the 3rd document that Mrs. Obiora Nwosu looked at the support desk. She looked because the judge said, "Officer, can I have the 1987 registration record?" And the officer reached without hesitation to the 3rd section of the file box, pulled the document, and passed it with the particular efficiency of someone who had organized the box herself and knew exactly where everything was. Mrs. Obiora Nwosu looked at the hands. The precise, unhurried hands. The gap between the front teeth, visible for a half-second as the officer turned back to her clipboard. She looked for a long time. The session continued for 1 hour and 37 minutes. At the end of it, the judge indicated that the property title was to be determined in Mrs. Obiora Nwosu's favor, pending submission of a replacement deed through the relevant registry, a process that the court would supervise. The neighboring family's competing claim was found to be insufficiently substantiated. Mrs. Obiora Nwosu had won. She sat in her seat after the judge left and the courtroom began to empty, and she did not stand up for 40 seconds, which was a long time to stay seated when everyone around you is moving. Barrister Adeyemi Bright was saying something about the registry timeline. She was not hearing it. The support officer was at the desk, returning documents to the file box in the order they had come out. Mrs. Obiora Nwosu stood and walked to the bar. She stopped. She said nothing for a moment. The officer continued with the documents until the last one was returned, and then she closed the file box, and then she looked up. "Ma," Adize Nwosu said. Mrs. Obiora Nwosu opened her mouth. Nothing came. Your case went well, Adaize said. She picked up the file box. She picked up the clipboard. She looked at Mrs. Obiora Nwosu for a moment, with the same steady, unhurried attention she had brought to every surface in the house on Bourdion Road for 11 years. Then, she walked toward the courtroom door. She did not look back. There is a specific kind of mistake that does not feel like a mistake when you make it. It feels like a decision, clean and final, and entirely yours to make. You have the power. You have the property. You have the gate. And on the other side of the gate is someone whose full dimensions you have never thought it necessary to see, because you have only ever needed to see the part of them that was useful to you. What Mrs. Obiora Nwosu threw out on Bourdion Road was not a uniform. She threw out 9 years of legal reading done at midnight. She threw out an 89 on a paralegal assessment. She threw out the woman whose hands would one day pass to a judge's bench the document that saved her land. She threw all of it into the dust because a vase was broken, and because it was easier to point at the woman with the broom than at the cousin on the sofa. You cannot know, when you dismiss a person, what that person is carrying, not because they hide it from you, though sometimes they do, and they have every right to, but because you never asked. Because asking required seeing them as someone whose full life was happening alongside yours rather than in service to it. Some people spend years in other people's houses and leave nothing behind. Others leave the house spotless, the linen folded, the shelf books in order, and walk out the gate carrying everything that was already theirs, all of it still intact. All of it still growing, none of it yours to keep. The morning Adaize Nwosu left number 14 Bourdion Road, she did not take anything that did not belong to her. But she carried 11 years of the professor's library in her mind, and a certificate with an 89 on it, and the name of a woman on Broad Street who had been holding a door open since a Tuesday afternoon in an internet cafe 3 years before. None of that fit in a bag. None of it could be thrown into the dust at the gate. If you have ever been dismissed by someone who did not know what they were dismissing, leave your answer in the comments. And if you have ever been the one who looked at a person and decided, without looking closely enough, that you already knew everything there was to see, I want to hear from you too. Subscribe for more stories about quiet work, hidden knowledge, and the people the world underestimates until it cannot afford to anymore. I'll see you in the next one.